All right, so we've got a ton of stuff to cover today. You guys have sent in some really interesting articles and research about this whole Trump coin phenomenon. It's definitely making headlines, but what's the reality beyond the hype? Let's dive in and see what this could actually mean for you as an investor.
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating about this one is that it's trying to be more than just another cryptocurrency riding the meme wave, like a Dogecoin or Shiba Inu. We're talking about a digital asset that's officially called Magecoin, that's deeply intertwined with Donald Trump and the Magie movement, which adds a whole other layer of complexity to this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it's not just about buying and selling. It's about buying into a whole ideology. I mean, they're aiming for long-term impact, combining political advocacy with economic functionality. But can those two worlds really coexist successfully? What do you think?
That's the big question. Aiming for long-term impact is commendable. But the success of this project really hinges on several factors. I think regulatory clarity being a big one. And also whether they can achieve broader adoption, beyond the core MGA base is a bold experiment for sure.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little further. So we're dealing with a cryptocurrency that was launched to tap into the energy, and let's be honest, the purchasing power of Trump supporters. The goal, according to the materials you sent, is to fund political campaigns, build loyalty programs, and advocate for decentralized finance. That whole less government control over assets thing that a lot of cryptocurrency enthusiasts are so passionate about.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting and potentially a bit tricky. The Trump Organization, through a company called CIC Digital LLC, holds a massive 80% stake in the tokens. And that's a level of centralized control that raises some eyebrows, considering most cryptocurrencies are built on the idea of decentralization.
Yeah, that 80% ownership, that does raise some eyebrows. Doesn't that contradict the whole ethos of decentralization that a lot of crypto enthusiasts, believe in? I mean, it's almost like having a central bank for your crypto.
Yeah, it does. It does raise questions. But it's important to note that a certain segment of investors might actually find this centralized control appealing. They might see it as offering stability, especially given the wild swings that are typical of decentralized cryptos. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Okay, so we've got political ties, big promises, centralized control, and of course the Trump factor, his branding power and the dedicated support of the Magie movement. It's almost like a built-in marketing machine. No wonder this is making headlines. And then there's the whole scarcity thing. They're only releasing 20% of the total billion coins right now, which creates that, that must-have feeling.
Right, you're right. Scarcity is a powerful psychological lever in investing. When something feels limited, its perceived value can skyrocket. And that buzz you mentioned.
Yeah.
Trump coin recently saw its value jump from $10 to over $70 before settling back down around $2.33. Talk about volatility.
Wow. I remember when I first dabbled in crypto a few years back. Let's just say those price swings can be an emotional roller coaster. So what's driving this wild ride? Is it just hype, or is there something more substantial at play?
I think there are a few things at play here. First, there's the speculation surrounding potential pro-cryptocurrency policies from a returning Trump administration. We're seeing chatter about possible executive orders aimed at lowering regulatory hurdles and promoting digital asset adoption. So people are essentially betting on a more favorable regulatory environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. But even with potentially favorable policies, the crypto space is inherently volatile, right? It seems like a risky bet, no matter who's in office.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Volatility is a huge risk factor.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that this coin is explicitly tied to Donald Trump and his policies, which, as we know, are quite polarizing. So that adds another layer of risk.
Right.
Because the coin's value could be heavily influenced by political events and sentiment.
So it's not just an investment in a technology or a financial instrument, it's an investment in a political future.
Precisely. And they're tying that political future to tangible benefits. Think discounts on Magie merchandise, priority access to campaign events, even potential virtual town halls with the Trump team. It's fascinating how they're merging political engagement with a cryptocurrency ecosystem.
Yeah, it is. But how does Trump coin actually work on a technical level? They claim to be built on a secure blockchain, which we know is pretty standard in the crypto world, but is there anything unique about their technology?
Yeah.
What kind of blockchain are we talking about here? Is it proof of work like Bitcoin or proof of stake like Ethereum? Understanding this could help us assess its energy, efficiency, and security.
Right. You're spot on. And then there are the transaction speeds, the transparency they claim to offer. and their anti-fraud mechanisms. Do these features really set them apart from other cryptocurrencies? Or are they just using the same old buzzwords? We need to dig a little deeper to find out.
Yeah, it's a blend of familiar crypto tech with this very specific MAGA branding and political utility layered on top. It's definitely a unique proposition. But like any investment, especially in the crypto space, there have to be risks, right? What are some of the red flags investors should be aware of?
Absolutely. And we'll dive into those risks and controversies next. So one of the biggest risks with Trump Coin, and maybe one of the most ironic, is that 80% ownership by CIC Digital LLC. That level of centralization really flies in the face of the whole decentralization principle that a lot of crypto enthusiasts, hold dear. It raises concerns about potential manipulation and control, which are supposed to be the very things that cryptocurrencies try to avoid.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Appealing to the crypto crowd while maintaining a very traditional top-down power structure. Do you think that will ultimately alienate some potential investors?
It's certainly a gamble, but let's not forget the regulatory hurdles they face. The cryptocurrency landscape is still relatively new, and governments around the world are grappling with how to regulate it. In the United States, we've got multiple agencies involved: the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCENTO-N. It's a complex web, and navigating that web is tricky, especially for a politically charged project like this one.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't financial experts, could you break down what those agencies do and how they might approach something like Trump Coin?
Absolutely. So let's start with the SEC, or the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're the big dogs when it comes to regulating investments. They focus on anything that could be considered a security, meaning an investment that represents ownership in a company or venture. Then there's the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. They typically deal with commodities like Bitcoin, which are primarily used for trading and speculation. And finally, you have FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which steps in when there are concerns about money laundering or other illegal activities.
Got it. So how does Trump Coin fit into all of this? Is it a security, a commodity, or something else entirely?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. The Trump Organization claims that Trump Coin is not a security, but some experts disagree, pointing to that 80% ownership by CIC Digital LLC. It suggests a level of centralized control that could be interpreted as an investment contract, which would place it squarely under the SEC's jurisdiction.
So that centralized ownership structure we talked about earlier could come back to haunt them. What would happen if the SEC decided to classify Trump Coin as a security?
Yeah, if the SEC were to deem Trump Coin a security, it would have to be registered with the agency and comply with a whole host of regulations, which could significantly impact their operations. Think of it as going from a freewheeling startup to a publicly traded company overnight.
Wow, that's a pretty big deal. And what about the CFTC? Could they get involved?
It's possible. If they determine that Trump Coin is primarily used for speculation and trading, kind of like Bitcoin, they could assert jurisdiction over it as well. And of course, there's always FinCEN, keeping an eye out for any potential for money laundering or shady financial dealings, especially given the politically sensitive nature of this whole venture.
So Trump Coin is essentially walking a regulatory tightrope, trying to avoid tripping any alarms. That's got to be stressful for them.
It definitely adds a layer of uncertainty. And remember, the regulatory landscape is constantly evolving. What's considered acceptable today might not be tomorrow.
That's true for the entire crypto space, though, right? That's not just a Trump Coin issue.
You're right. The entire cryptocurrency industry is navigating these choppy regulatory waters. But the political ties of Trump Coin, the high-profile nature of the project, and the potential for controversy put it under a much brighter spotlight.
It's like they're under a microscope, and every move they make is being analyzed and scrutinized, not just by regulators, but by the public as well.
Exactly. And that scrutiny will likely intensify as they move forward with their plans for growth and adoption. Remember all those ambitions we talked about, integrating Trump Coin into the MAGA ecosystem, getting more merchants to accept it, partnering with influencers and exchanges. Each of those steps will bring them under even closer examination.
It's almost like they're playing a high-stakes game of chess, trying to anticipate the regulator's next move while simultaneously building out their platform.
It's a delicate balancing act, to say the least. And the stakes are incredibly high. If they can successfully navigate these regulatory challenges, Trump Coin could become a major force in both the cryptocurrency and political landscapes. But if they stumble...
Well, what happens if they stumble? What are the potential consequences?
If they stumble, the consequences could be severe. Regulatory fines, legal battles, damage to the Trump brand, and a loss of trust among investors are all very real possibilities. And for the average investor, getting caught up in that kind of turmoil can be devastating.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of Trump coin, the origins, the ambitions, the tech, the regulatory challenges, the risks. But what about the big picture? How could a politically charged cryptocurrency like this potentially impact, the broader financial and political landscape? It's a pretty mind-blowing concept when you think about it.
It is mind-blowing. Imagine a world where every political movement, every ideology has its own dedicated currency. Its own little economy humming along within its own echo chamber. It's fascinating and, to be honest, a little bit unsettling.
Yeah, it is a bit unsettling. It could lead to even further fragmentation and polarization within society. I mean, if people are primarily transacting within their own political bubbles.
Right.
Using currencies that align with their beliefs, it could create these parallel economies that never really interact with each other.
Exactly. And think about the implications for political fundraising and influence. Imagine campaigns fueled by dedicated cryptocurrencies. Supporters wouldn't just donate, they'd be incentivized to invest in those currencies.
Yeah.
It could create a whole new level of engagement, but it also raises some serious questions.
Yeah, the current campaign finance system is already a bit of a black box. Throwing cryptocurrencies into the mix could make it even harder to track, where the money is coming from and who's influencing whom. It could potentially create new avenues for corruption, right?
Yeah, it's a real concern. Transparency and accountability would be absolutely crucial. But let's not forget about the potential impact on traditional financial institutions. Could politically aligned cryptocurrencies disrupt the existing banking system? What if people start to see these new currencies as a viable alternative to traditional banks, especially if they offer faster, cheaper, and more ideologically aligned financial services?
It's like a digital version of those credit unions that cater to specific groups or professions, but on a much larger scale. We're talking about potentially reshaping the financial landscape as we know it. That's a pretty massive shift.
It is. It's a possibility, although it's still too early to say how likely it is. A lot will depend on things like how the regulatory landscape evolves, the pace of technological advancements in the crypto space, and of course, public acceptance.
Right. It all comes down to whether people are actually willing to use these new forms of money and embrace the ideologies they represent. Will they prioritize convenience, ideology, or a combination of both when making financial decisions?
That's the big question. And honestly, it's a question that extends far beyond Trump coin. We're on the cusp of a new era where the lines between finance, technology, and politics are blurring. It's exciting, a little bit scary, and definitely something we'll all be grappling with in the years to come.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around, but that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. We've explored the origins, the ambitions, the challenges, the potential impact of Trump coin. It's a story that's still being written.
Exactly. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. As the cryptocurrency landscape continues to evolve, these kinds of intersections between money, tech, and ideology are only going to become more common, more complex, and more consequential.
So for you listening out there, what do you think? Could Trump coin be the start of a new wave of politically aligned cryptocurrencies? Is this a glimpse into the future of finance and politics?
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and as always, keep those deep diving minds engaged.
Thanks for joining us on this wild ride. Until next time.